My name is Neil Mammen. I'm with My Church Finder, and I also wrote a book called Jesus is Involved in Politics. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church? And one of the fundamental things that I teach in that book, besides the fact that Jesus was involved in politics, which I'll talk about in just a second, is the difference between rights, or what rights are, and how you differentiate them between that and something else. For instance, people think that healthcare or education is a right. But we know that faith and freedom, those are all rights. So how do we differentiate, how do we tell the difference? Well, for instance, a gun is not a right. You have a right to own a gun, but you don't have any right to a gun. When you're born, you can't force your neighbors to buy a gun and give it to you as a gift. So you have the right for freedom of speech, but you're not entitled to a printing press. You're not entitled to free printing newspaper. You know, if you want to print a newspaper with your ideas, or a pamphlet with your ideas, you got to pay somebody for it. So you have the right to say what you want to say, but you got to pay for those things. So what are the two differences? For instance, you have a right to get an education, but don't have a right to be given a free education. Why? Because if you say that you have a right to an education, well then, your question is, where are you getting that education from? Do you get it from, where, I mean, are you going to capture a bunch of teachers and beat them until they give you a free education? Obviously not, because you're enslaving the teachers. But instead, what we really do is we enslave everybody, take 30% of their salaries, and give people free education. So what you're doing is you're taking away somebody's rights and giving them what we call goods and services. So goods and services are the product of somebody's labor. Anytime a right that you call is dependent on goods and services, you've got to take those goods and services forcibly from somebody else. And that's the problem and that's the difference also between goods and rights. So a right is something God gives you. Goods and services are the product of somebody's labor. So that's the difference. Second thing, the question is, was Jesus involved in politics? Well, first of all, we have to understand, where did we get the whole idea of a republic from? The very first time we see a republic in the history of mankind is in Exodus 18, which says there should be layered. 10 people vote for 50, or everybody votes for 1 in 10, 1 in 10, those 1 in 10 votes for 1 in 50, 1 in 50 votes for 1 in 100, 1 in 100 votes for 1 in 1,000. So the whole concept of the republic comes from Exodus, the first time we ever see that, and this is what works, and this is what the U.S. Constitution is based on. So that's in the Torah. So do you think Jesus would not have voted? It's in the Torah. Didn't he say that not one jot or tittle of the law would ever pass until they were fulfilled? Well, there we go. So we know he was involved in the political process, but he also had, what we forget is that they had a constitution. In Israel, they had a constitution. Now, Jesus could not get involved in Roman politics, but he could get involved in Judean politics. Just like when we were governing Iraq, we didn't run their politics. They had their own government. So Jesus had his own government, and they made their own laws. So the Constitution was the Torah, but all the lesser laws were set by a group, and we call them the Sanhedrin. Well, who were the members of the Sanhedrin? Well, they were the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, most of us think that the Pharisees and Sadducees were these bunch of priests. Not at all. Only the top, the high priest, and one or two positions below him were of high priests and Levites. Everybody else was a politician, a straight politician. And these politicians were the people that Jesus talked all the time. And he argued with them. He was very nice to them. He never called them vipers and pit of snakes and, and dirty, rotten gravestones. No, he would never do that, did he? No, he did. So my question to pastors is, why aren't you being Christ-like to your politicians and calling them out when they do bad things? And threatening them with hell when they do bad things, just like Jesus would. So in the same way, Jesus was involved in politics on a daily basis. In fact, you can't even preach the gospel without quoting what he said to his politician Nicodemus, the ruler of the men, saying, you have to be born again.